Well, if you have subscribed and have watched this channel for any amount of time, you know that one of the questions that I get probably more often than any other is, when are you going to do something about World War II in the Pacific? Well, the answer to that is today. Right now, I'm probably about as far away from home as I have ever been, on the island of Saipan, where in June and July of 1944, one of the most decisive and brutal battles of the Pacific Campaign took place. So first impressions of Saipan. It's kind of hot and it's kind of humid, and I'm kind of wearing a black shirt, but that's okay because I'm just happy to be here. To finally be able to get to one of the battlefields of the Pacific has me more excited than I can really express with words. Now, right off, we've got kind of an interesting place that we're going to go visit here in the town of Garapan, here on Saipan. But I feel like we need to kind of set up this battle a little bit first. We have moved back off the beach here just a little bit, and after Pearl Harbor, things weren't necessarily going awesome for the Japanese. They had lost the Solomon Islands. They had been soundly defeated at the Battle of Midway. They had lost the Marshall Islands. And by the summer of 1944, the Americans were getting dangerously close to being within striking distance of the home islands of Japan. So the Japanese formed something that they called the Absolute Defense Sphere. And included in the Absolute Defense Sphere were the Northern Marianas, or the Northern Mariana Islands. Included in that would be Guam, Saipan, and Tinian. And look at here. Here is one of the Japanese bunkers here on Saipan, on the western side of the island. Everybody knows how much I like bunkers, and yeah, really interesting to see the construction of a Japanese bunker for the first time. So this one would have been providing flanking fire to the northern part of the western side of this island, or it's kind of facing north, and then here you have this opening facing right out to the sea. So the Japanese had the 31st Army here in the Northern Marianas. That was led by a guy named Lieutenant General Obata. He had served in Burma in 1942. I'm going to circle around here and look at the other side. The 43rd Division of the Japanese would be here in Saipan. The 29th would be in Guam. We're actually going to be going to Guam here in a few days. And the 43rd Division had a new commander by the name of Lieutenant General Saito. His first name is really hard for me to pronounce. But anyway, he had left Nagoya in May and was going to be commanding the 43rd Division, which was nicknamed the Honor Division. Now, if we think of the Battle of Saipan like a heavyweight boxing match, as we mentioned, we already have General Saito on the Japanese side, who is going to be in control of ground forces for the Japanese here on Saipan. On the American side, the guy who was going to be calling the shots was a Marine general by the name of Holland Howlin' Mad Smith. So he even has a cool nickname to go with our boxer analogy. Holland Smith was going to be commanding, in general, there are other smaller units involved, but in general, the assault forces here on Saipan are going to be the 2nd and 4th Marine Division and the 27th Infantry Division. Saipan's going to be unique in a lot of different ways. It has the largest Japanese tank assault in the Pacific Theater. It's going to have the largest banzai charge of the Pacific Theater. And the American plan to take the Marianas was called Operation Forager. So before an assault could happen, Well, there had to be some intelligence gathering. And that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on in this particular video. On May 29th of 1944, air crews from the 98th and 431st Bombardment Squadron took off from Inuiatok and made the 13-hour trip to Saipan to do a photo reconnaissance mission. And escorting them were a group of B-24s. Well, as the planes were passing over, there was some anti-aircraft fire, and then the Japanese, their kind of standard operating procedure was to allow planes to pass over and then deploy their fighters. Well, there was one of the B-24s that was having some engine problems. Whoop, I'm about to get wet. And another one by the name of, nicknamed Cloudy Joe, under the leadership of a guy named Captain Lawrence Stoddard, hung back to try and help them out. Japanese fighter ended up hitting him in the left wing, and they had to crash land right out here in this big blue ocean. Whenever you think about how vast this ocean is, to me the idea of crash landing out there is absolutely horrifying. So once Cloudy Joe hit the water, it sank and went to the bottom of the ocean within 30 seconds. Stoddard was one of 4 survivors. The co-pilot, the bombardier, and the radio operator also survived the crash. And they got in a raft, and on June 2nd, we don't know exactly where, but somewhere along the Saipan coastline, they washed ashore and were taken prisoners of the Japanese. So right now, we're going to go take a look at the Japanese jail where Stoddard and his 3 crew members were held. Now, after Stoddard and these survivors from his crew washed up on the shores of Saipan on June 2nd, as I mentioned, they were taken prisoner, and they were brought to this place right here, which today is known as the old Japanese jail. And I've got some dogs here behind me who are not too thrilled that I am here right now. But man, for these guys who were taken prisoner, this had to be a terrifying ordeal, because if you think about somebody taken prisoner in Europe, that would be scary. But if you escape, well, maybe you can get, you know, some assistance from the French resistance or something like that. Here, we're on an island in the middle of the Pacific. So maybe they could escape and survive in the jungle, but chances of survival, if you escape, we're going to be pretty slim in this area. But anyway, we're going to go in and take a look at a few of these cells inside the old Japanese jail. Wow. This place is really, really interesting. So yeah, you can see, of course, we're looking at a structure that has seen better days. We got some roosters here in the neighborhood as well. But yeah, these are the cells that the prisoners of Saipan would have been held in. So Stoddard and his men would have all been divided up and put into one of these cells. And something that's kind of interesting, they, of course, you know, interrogated the prisoners, and at first they just gave their name, rank, and serial number. But then, you know, after a certain amount of pressure, started trying to at least mislead their Japanese captors. The Japanese seemed really interested on like radar and radio communications. One thing that's interesting that they never ask about, was what their mission was here on Saipan, and didn't ask anything about a possible invasion. But here, we'll kind of step in here a little bit. Got some sun flares. But yeah, this is what one of these jail cells would have looked like in here. Now, Stoddard and his crew weren't the only guys who were held here at this Japanese jail. There were a few other airmen who ended up being unjustly killed and burned just outside of the gates of the prison. And after the war, one of the native Chamorros here took some of the Americans and showed them where the charred remains were. The Japanese policemen who committed that atrocity were going to be tried for war crimes, but they ended up getting killed in the Battle of Saipan. As for Stoddard and his crew, on June 6th, as the Americans were making their way to Saipan, they ended up being loaded up on a Japanese ship and sent to Japan, where they would spend the next 15 months in a Japanese prison. One of the crew members, I believe the bombardier, a guy by the name of Ernest Pinchot, ended up dying of his injuries, but the other three survived the war. So anyway, that was a little bit to start off our trip here in Saipan. We've got a lot that we're going to be looking at. We're going to be going to Purple Heart Ridge and to the place where the largest bonsai charge took place, and to the suicide cliffs. All kinds of things to see here in Saipan. We are constantly exploring and learning new things on this channel, so if you found value in this video, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell to catch all of the new content when it comes out. And be sure to check the links in the description for more content and opportunities from our partners.